Hello, good evening. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Center for Fiction. How many of you are visiting us for the first time tonight? All right. Well, you're all welcome. If you're not familiar with us, we're the only literary nonprofit that focuses on the creation and enjoyment of fiction. And our home here in Brooklyn is a great gathering place for readers and writers. You can become a member and use our library upstairs too. So check us out on the website. Um, our partners this evening are the Brooklyn Caribbean Literary Festival, and the founder, Marcia, is stuck in traffic. But let me just tell you a little bit about them. We opened this building in 2019, and that was also the first year of the Brooklyn Caribbean Literary Festival, which happens the weekend after Labor Day every year. So come back, because it's their fifth year, and it's going to be a lot of amazing, fun things happening here that weekend. A couple of housekeeping announcements. We will have an audience Q&A, and when it's time to go to questions, if you're here, please raise your hand and wait for one of our fabulous interns to bring a microphone to you so that the people watching on the live stream can hear your question too. And if you're watching on the live stream, you can type your question in the chat at any time. When the event is over, you can purchase copies of both authors' books at the bookstore, and we'll do a personalization line on the other side of this wall here. The cafe and bar will be serving drinks until 8:30, and drinks are welcomed and encouraged in here. It's my special honor tonight to introduce the Deputy Borough President, Kim Council, who's here to help us celebrate this evening and who will introduce our wonderful authors. So please welcome Kim.
Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. I am the Deputy Borough President, Reverend Kim Council, and it is truly a pleasure and an honor to be here today, and I bring you greetings on behalf of our Borough President, the Honorable Antonio Reynoso. I'm excited to be here today to welcome to the stage tonight two fantastic authors who will be in conversation about a new book called Vanishing Maps, as well as the process of crafting complex characters and weaving together multi-generational narratives. And so we're honored to welcome Cristina García, the author of 8 novels, including Dreaming in Cuban, The Aguero Sisters, Monkey Hunting, The Handbook to Luck, The Lady Matador's Hotel, King of Cuba, and Here in Berlin. Garcia's work has been nominated for a National Book Award and translated into 15 languages. She's taught at universities nationwide and is currently resident playwright at Central Works Theater in Berkeley. I'd also like to introduce Mr. Ernesto Mestre, author of the novels The Lazarus Rumba, The Second Death of Única Avellano, and Sacrificio. Ernesto is a Guggenheim Fiction Fellow, a McDowell Fellow, and teaches at Brooklyn College. He was born in Guantanamo, Cuba, and has also translated many novels from Spanish, including Laura Esquivel's Malaniche. Please welcome them to the stage.
Okay, great. We're going to do something a little different tonight. First of all, welcome. Thank you so much all for coming here. I see some friendly faces. And the sun came out amazingly. I thought I'd have to use the cliche dark and stormy night, but I don't have to do that. So we're going to mix it up a little bit tonight. I asked Ernesto if he would read the prologue for me from Vanishing Maps. I would be curious to hear it in his voice. Then we'll talk a little bit, and then I'm going to read. His part is maybe like 4 minutes, and then mine will be about 10 or 12 minutes, and then we're going to break it open for questions. And I think of it as a bit of a free-for-all. We'll talk, you talk, hands up, whatever. Okay, let's not stand on formalities here. Thank you so much for coming, and take it away, Ernesto.
Thank you so much for coming. I'm so honored to be here with Cristina. As a writer, those of you who write and those of you who read a lot, you know that most of us have these front row writers, the kind of writers that you go to when your own work is not working, when you're sitting at the computer and nothing's going right, and you start saying, I'm going to go read Faulkner, I read Cristina, I read John Donne, and I've known her since she published her first book, and I am very honored to be here to introduce this amazing new novel. I'm going to read from the prologue. Prologue. Ivanito Villaverde, Berlin. It was past midnight and the crowd was clamoring for their diva. At Sheshati, everyone danced with whomever they pleased. Tonight was another coming out party, a flagrant parade of secrets. Life was more alluring when they drank, when they got high, when they swayed as one. Last New Year's Eve, when La Ivanita dragged a jewel-encrusted ball and chain on stage, she'd incited a rejoicing. For this and much more, she was beloved in ravenous after-hours Berlin. Backstage, La Ivanita put the finishing touches on her makeup, thickly angled eyeliner, iridescent powder, a slip of pink gloss on her lips. She adjusted her wig and smoothed the satin pleats of her vintage strapless gown. For the past 4 months, she'd been rehearsing a playlist of Olga Guillet's sultriest boleros. Miénteme, te amaré toda la vida. Total. Until her lip singing was flawless. Guillet was her latest muse, a half-Jewish diva, a genius of gesture and melodrama who'd enthralled Cuba in the 50s. Her voice drifted up from the turntable, which was perched next to a crystal bowl brimming with tangerines. La Ivanita appraised herself in the gilded full-length mirror, a flea market find. The vendor had flaunted its pedigree, but she bargained him down to 20 marks flat. A reproduction of Auro Dix's Metropolis hung on the wall behind her, its central panel luridly visible in the mirror. She placed 3 caramels and a shot glass of schnapps on her tiny Santeria altar, which was flickering with votive candles. A flash of movement over her shoulder distracted her. La Ivanita turned around, vertebrae cracking, and scrutinized the tangle of glittering costumes in which her fans occasionally hid. She dreamed of finding her Russian dancer there, a god of a man with whom she'd enjoyed a swoony affair years ago. Her testicles ached just thinking about him. As she faced the mirror again, a thumb-sized turbulence like a speck of thundercloud rotated in the upper left-hand corner. The thundercloud grew 3-dimensionally, shooting off miniature lightning bolts that floated directly into her sightline, as if daring La Ivanita to defy its existence. It was from this vortex that her mother emerged, or rather, the ghost of her did, lumpy and sleepy-eyed, and wrapped in what looked like a World War II parachute, its edges frayed with red thread. La Ivanita was stunned. She tried to speak, but her throat closed off and her whole body trembled. Was she hallucinating? Her mother shifted incrementally, turned in place to show off her camouflage. La Ivanita didn't know where to focus as the colors blended and whirled. Mommy opened her mouth and emitted a low, rasping sound, as if trying to rip the fibrous membrane dividing the living from the dead. Imagination, like memory, can transform lies to truth, she used to say. Is that what was happening here? A brazen rearranging of reality? Before La Ivanita could utter a word, Mommy vanished through the same knot in the universe from which she'd appeared. Only the spectral scent of gardenias betrayed that anything unusual had occurred. The opening notes of Guillet's Miénteme reverberated through the theater. La Ivanita felt shaky, but she worked too hard to call off this show. She pushed aside the leather curtain of her dressing room and glided onto the proscenium in sequined heels. The spotlight transformed her dazzling white gown into an even more dazzling blue. The piano fell reverentially silent. Waiters were fixed in place, silver trays suspended, fanciful cocktails froze in midair. Ivanita raised her arms and welcomed the worshipful roar of her fans. Yes, this was her private chapel. Voy viviendo ya de tus mentiras. Sé que tu cariño no es sincero. Sé que mientes al besar y mientes al decir te quiero.
Thank you so much. I just sprung that on him, so thank you. Well, just as a kind of general introduction, Vanishing Maps is a standalone book, but it follows also the lives of the characters from my very first book, Dreaming in Cuban from 1992. Except now they're all over the globe instead of just in Cuba and or Miami. So it's really a book about the Cuban diaspora. A lot of the action actually takes place in Berlin, but there's Moscow scenes and other scenes. And
how did you decide to come back to these characters? Because often, one time, reading, someone asked me, "Do you think about your characters after the novel is over?" And I was embarrassed to say, "Absolutely not. I have." So how are you inspired to come back to the characters? But it's also such a different novel in some ways. Both have their greatness, but it transcends certain things that the first novel was not interested in.
Yeah, well, thank you. No, I wasn't interested either, frankly. Dreaming in Cuban ended ambiguously with the Celia del Pino character, the matriarch of the clan, sort of wading into the sea, and you don't know whether she's trying to kill herself, go for a midnight swim, catch the Coast Guard to Florida. You don't know. And people would ask me that over the years, and I was like, I don't know. I don't really know what happened to her. And so it wasn't so fast forward, like 25 years, and I was asked by a young Cuban director, producer to adapt Dreaming in Cuban. Would I work with him on that? And I said, well, okay, but hell if I remember what happened, it's been a while. But in the process of rereading the book, getting reacquainted with the characters, and then having the deep pleasure of seeing them embodied by good actors, I just became completely interested in them again. And that's where that curiosity led to following up on them 20 years later. So Dreaming Cuban ends in 79, 80, or I think 80, and this novel takes place 1999 to 2000.
20 years later.
Yeah.
So much of this novel depends on the secrets that we keep and how hidden perspectives or the perspectives that we have that we keep hidden are somehow manufactured by shame, by things that have happened to us. Can you talk a little about that as the creations of some of the main characters, including Ivanito and Felicia, and how that may be connected to the sort of political situation in Cuba? I mean, if you come from a country that's broken, and I guess a lot of us are experiencing this in this country now, how much does that affect the characters you write about who come from there?
Yeah, well, I think secrets are where all the juice is, and so I think one has to reach down and tell them in all their grisly glory, really, and mostly people are papering things over, and social media, I think, reinforces that, just the best look, just the best times, just the best smiles, and then you can even edit those, make your teeth whiter or whatever. So I think for me, I think I abide connect very deeply with something Chekhov said in his story, The Lady with the Dog, where he's leading a kind of double life, with this woman he's fallen in love with, he's married, and he says something to the effect, I can't believe the audacity of paraphrasing Chekhov here in front of all of you, but he says something to the effect that if my life is any indication, people's best lives are lived in secret. Boy, I really mangled that one, but you get the idea, right? So I think that's true, and I think that's part of the archaeology of every character. And if you're going to follow them around and present them and be present and available to them, that also means being available to their secrets.
The visitor in your previous novel, Here in Berlin, which I think is more a companion to this novel than Dreaming in Cuban, says, I think my best life is my illicit life, which is a little bit different than that, when she's talking about her mother. Do you remember that?
No, but thank you. Did I say that? Okay.
The visitor says that, yeah.
Okay, I believe you, but like onto other things.
But no, but that's a connection between the two, right? Like this idea of because in some ways secrets are illicit, and that there is a kind of, especially with Cubans, I think there's a kind of sort of revolutionary spirit that's always been at work about subverting the status quo.
Right. Well, in reading your latest novel, Sacrificio, there's this whole duality all the time. There's the sort of the pantomime of public life and what you have to do to sort of get by. And then there's the real life of resolviendo. How do we resolve this problem or that problem? And that's a very practical and often furtive venture, but there is something about the public gesturing that, we see it in our own politics, and yeah, I don't know. I think it's a worldwide phenomenon.
But I think, and the way you kind of used this idea of perspective, like coming at a situation from different perspectives, which you used in Here in Berlin, and you used definitely in this novel as well, is an attempt or at getting these hidden truths. And the hidden truths are sometimes personal, but in relation to Cuba, they're often political as well.
Yeah, and I found that in Berlin too, which a lot of the novel takes place there too. I felt I had this impression when I was there for about 3 months, about 10 years ago, and then I was back again just in May for the month of May. And to me, it almost feels like I'm walking and hearing the whispering, like I'm walking on people's graves, I'm walking on stories, I'm walking and just listening. I almost don't talk to anyone when I'm there. I'm just listening constantly and reading a lot as well. And so I think a lot of people just die with their secrets. It's not even on their lips. And I think shame buries way too much in our lives. But should I read a little bit, or do you want to do one more question?
One more question. Talk a little bit about your, when you haven't been to a city. I've never been to Berlin, so I know Berlin from John le Carré and from your work. I like your Berlin better somehow. But talk about that, your fascination with that city in the last 2 books, and as a city in flux, as a city of reinvention, as a city of this history that can be talked about but not talked about at the same time, the way we deal with our own sort of sins and shames.
Yeah. Berlin to me is endlessly fascinating, and I first went there as a college student when the wall was up, when it was very much divided, when you had to take a little train that was extremely well monitored just from one side of the city to the other as a tourist, and then I didn't go back again for 30 years, and when I got to Berlin and then read about what happened after the fall of the wall, etc., it just seemed to me to have echoes of the whole Weimar era, when Berlin, before the Third Reich, happened. It was a city that welcomed all refugees, artistic, sexual, scientific. Everybody was welcomed, and that's where you could be yourself. And there was an explosion of that in the 90s that still persists today.
After the wall fell.
After the wall fell. So I was very interested when I went back for those 3 months is trying to understand what that seismic, cataclysmic change meant, not only for the city, but for everyone it was attracting. And also, Cuba has had a very close relationship with the Soviet Union. So when it dissolved and Eastern Europe dissolved, it impacted Cuba enormously. In fact, it ushered in over a decade of what they call the special period, which was a period of terrible privation. I went there during this period, so did you. So it's all, to me, globally interconnected. It also was a city divided in a way that Cuban society is divided between those that remained on the island and those who left and who are in the diaspora. And that's a sort of an exploding, I think of it as a big bang. Cubans are everywhere now. Someone said that there was, were you the one who told me this? No, someone told me that they were in Egypt and the guy renting camels was Cuban, and they're like, how did you end up here? Oh, yeah, So multiply hyphenated, this whole idea of, is already outdated, this notion of Cubans with you, Cubans against you. It's a much, much bigger world. And in the Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, Vietnam, Cubans of Vietnam, that's what I'm interested in that whole globalization and what that means to individual identity, belonging, and allegiances.
I think in the previous novel, too, I think that you dig into the history that's there that people can talk about but don't often talk about. And the novel has a main character, a nameless main character, the visitor, who others open up to in a way that they cannot open up even to themselves, which is amazing as a way that you consider haunting or the idea of Catholic confession. And it's really fascinating because it has this history of what the Nazis did. It was the most nefarious crime of the last century. But the novel, you somehow maneuver it so that it can be talked about. And it can be talked about from both sides. It's amazing.
Well, thank you, Ernesto. I knew I asked you to do this for a reason. Okay. All right, I'm going to read a little bit. So this section is a little bit longer than the section that Ernesto read. And I talked about the matriarch who walks into the sea. She's about 70 when that happens. And so 20 years later, she's 90 years old. So she made it back to shore, obviously. And not only has she made it back to shore, but she also had just a passionate affair in the 1930s with a married Spaniard who ended up, they were just together a few days and then he decamped, ended up in Spain. But his wife died, and now he's made Overture. So what I'm going to read is when they finally reunite after 66 years. Both in their 90 and 90 plus. I might need some water for this one. Okay, I'm going to take this. Yeah. So this is their first meeting. It's 2000, and I should also mention that it's interspersed with a bit of García Lorca's poem Verde que te quiero verde, green I love you green. So in which the lovers meet in Granada after 66 years. Celia spotted him first. He was wearing a bone-colored suit and leaning loosely on his cane, as if it were decorative, a bit of foppery. A spray of red carnations floated luminously from his grasp. Gustavo was bald and elegant, but didn't remotely resemble the man she remembered. His left eye looked milky, too. A cataract? Celia waited, watching him as her past and present converged. Gustavo continued to scan the arriving passengers and finally settled on her. His expression flagged almost imperceptibly, but his eyes remained joyful. Celia's fitted green dress was cinched at the waist, but she felt no less a relic. Verde, que te quiero verde. How long had she dreamed of this moment? But in her dream, she and Gustavo were the same age as they'd been in 1934. Supple-skinned, indefatigable, lovesick. Youth was an immortal god, and they had been gods together. Yet this old man didn't displease Celia either. His face was baby smooth, almost pearlescent, and she had to stop herself from stroking his cheek. Mi amor. Gustavo dropped his cane with a clatter and moved toward her, arms wide, carnations drooping. His gait was confident, though lurching. He stood before Celia, unblinking as a child, searching for who she'd been, who she'd once been, inside of who she was now. He cupped her chin with a papery hand, his fingers gnarled, knuckles shining, as if he'd polished them for the occasion. You haven't changed a bit. Then Gustavo leaned toward her with lips redolent of eucalyptus and kissed Celia full on the mouth, the tip of his tongue skirting hers, oblivious to the sea of rushing, irritable travelers around them. Verde viento, verdes ramas. So we begin with a lie. Celia was startled yet quietly delighted. Gustavo's kiss registered seismically in her body. Its crevices and hidden rivers. Who knew she was still capable of such heat? It always began with the tongue, she thought, that most miraculous of muscles. A part of her didn't want to waste another minute in small talk, preferring to lock themselves up in a hotel room for 4 more days. That would add up to 8 days of bliss in one lifetime. How many people could claim even that? It's no lie, Gustavo said simply, glancing at the carnations now scattered on the faux marble floor. His teeth were unnaturally white. Were they dentures? Would he need to remove them at night? Brush them like a precious accessory? Drop them in a glass fizzing with cleaning tablets? What other grisly details awaited them? What they needed urgently was an armoire in which to store all the telltale signs of old age. Joint ointments and reading glasses, incontinence pads, blood pressure medications, orthopedic inserts, enemas, antacids, compression socks. There were no lasting remedies for their beleaguered bodies. Unruly sags and pouches, arthritic creaks and drooping declivities. Acres of wrinkles, meshwork of varicose veins. Only moonlight and artful camouflage could save them. Celia ignored the pain in her neck from the immobilizing flights. Her ankles were swollen, her stomach acidic, and cold air had settled in her knees. She'd hardly slept, only a sporadic dozing that left her frazzled. At a lingerie boutique in the Madrid airport, where Celia caught a connecting flight to Granada, she'd splurged on a lacy red push-up bra with matching panties. If that wasn't optimism, what was? The checkout clerk had curiously reviewed her selections, but Celia refused to submit to any transgenerational camaraderie. Verde que te quiero verde. No? Gustavo asked. No what? You're shaking your head. He looked bemused, but with a hint of worry. Oh, I was just thinking of other things. I stand before you after 66 years and you're distracted? I must look like hell. Celia laughed. They held each other's gaze for a long moment, ignoring the loudspeakers announcing flights to Marrakesh, Nairobi, Sao Paulo, Calcutta. On her deathbed, Gustavo's incurably jealous wife had made him swear that he wouldn't contact Celia again. But death, as everyone knew, broke every promise. Bajo la luna gitana. Let's both enjoy our beautiful lies, Celia said, her flirtation surfacing, and promise each other this, that in the time we have left, we'll always choose a good story over the truth, unless the truth is a better story. But how will we know the difference? We won't. That's what I'm telling you. Go Coño, was she going to have to explain everything to him? Telling me what? Gustavo insisted. ¿Qué cosa? Celia turned her head, the better to hear him. Her left ear felt clogged, as if stuffed with cotton, a residual from her ear-popping flights. She felt a headache coming on, too. Nothing a cafecito with extra sugar wouldn't fix. About truth. That it doesn't matter. The last thing Celia wanted was to rehash the past. ¿Qué más da? She was here in Granada, wasn't she? Their memories were crumbs, subject to birds, to breezes. They had no time to grow old all over again. But a little flamenco, a gypsy moon, a night to sing, to dance, to fling themselves back into the heart of love. Verde carne, pero verde. I want you to believe everything I tell you. Gustavo was resolute. He slipped a pair of wire-rimmed glasses from his jacket and put them on. His eyes grew enormous behind the lenses, like a tree frog's, the better to track her with. I'll believe everything you tell me, true or not. Celia was impatient to stop this nonsense before it went any further. There was no time to waste. After the tremendous effort to get here, she feared losing her nerve in the momentum of that first kiss. And I need you to forgive me. How Catholic of you, Celia said brusquely. How far is the Alhambra from here? I'm serious, Celia. How far? Not too far, but I'm not ready for us to be tourists yet. I'm here. Isn't that forgiveness enough? Might just be curiosity. I've traveled a long way. Celia was hungry and cranky, and her head throbbed from the lack of caffeine, and in circles, it seems. Progress is always circular. Con ojos de fría plata. Celia didn't remember Gustavo ever being this stubbornly garrulous. It was not an appealing feature. You know the most crucial thing I learned when I traveled? Gustavo droned on. Maybe if she remained silent, if they both remained silent, if their mouths were no longer diverted by the impositions of language, their bodies would take the lead. That I don't exist. No entiendo, she said. Traveling is a liminal space suspended in time, like us. But I exist, Celia shot back. I've never stopped existing. This wasn't getting off to an auspicious start. If her visit with Gustavo was a fracaso, she would devote her trip to the memory of García Lorca, join the pilgrims who hunted for his unmarked grave in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada, strewing armloads of lilies in his name. What else could she do? She'd come this far, and returning home was not an option. Verde, que te quiero verde. I have something to show you. Gustavo pulled a Minifex camera from his vest pocket, the very one Celia had sold him at El Encanto department store in 1934. I stumbled across it last year. I took it as a sign. Celia wondered if the camera had served its purpose. Had Gustavo secretly documented the atrocities of the Spanish Civil War through the peephole in his overcoat? Had he succeeded in bringing justice to any of the war's victims? Or, as Gustavo hinted, had he suffered on account of his deeds, been thrown in jail, tortured? Was this minuscule camera, and by extension Celia, responsible for his limp, for his oddly angled elbow, broken by a phalangist's club? Gustavo seemed eager to share every gruesome detail of his ordeals, whether Celia wanted to hear them or not. Sometimes I lose track of what's most important, he continued with regret, and I forget what I should remember. He held up the camera and, smiling, took her picture. For a moment, Celia was grateful, relieved that Gustavo had abandoned her when he did. At least they'd avoided the love-suffocating rituals of conjugality. These days, Celia wasn't the least bit interested in polite discourse or suffering tedium or pretending to ignore what annoyed her. She wanted what she wanted and refused to apologize for the wanting. At her age, didn't she deserve that much? I need a cafecito first. Celia balanced her purse on her left arm and took Gustavo's good elbow with her right. Then we'll jump off a cliff together. So there's a little bit. Thanks.
That line killed me. Youth is an immortal God, and they have been gods together. I think you can only appreciate that line at our age. But it's about sort of this passion. For those of you who are young, you're gonna appreciate that line a lot more later. But it's about sort of that, especially the way it captures the passion of what young love is, and how we always remember that, and how it almost always feels like you're doing the scene almost out of reach afterwards. That kind of feeling. Amazing.
66 years is a long time. You know? So she's never left Cuba, you know, though. It's such a heightened
and she's
thing,
an interesting character because she's the one that remains true to the revolution.
To the end.
And her passion for Fidel is almost erotic. Not almost, it is
No,
erotic.
it is erotic. Yeah, definitely erotic.
Can you talk a little bit about that? My mother has an interesting story when in Guantanamo with her. She was 19 and her friend was 18 and Fidel was in town. He was in the hotel in town. And they go, we got to go see him. But this was like a year after the revolution. So these two little teenage girls, they go see, they go see the comandante, and he says there's guards with shotguns and all that standing by the hotel, and he's walking down the stairs, and he looks at them and he goes, "Señoritas," and I asked my mother now, who's rabid Miami anti-communist, I go, "Was he a good-looking man?" And he goes, "He was gorgeous." So I think that's what Celia.
Well, it's so true. He was wildly popular in the early days, especially, and when he was on that long journey from the eastern provinces of Cuba into Havana, they were greeted, almost like Elvis. Women were throwing panties at him, and then, just everything. They were kind of rock stars, and my grandmother, I would say, my own grandmother was in love with Fidel Castro.
Like Celia is, right?
Like Celia is, and she used to keep a little framed photograph of him on her nightstand, and in the morning she's like, "Buenos días, mi cielo, ¿cómo te sientes hoy?" It's like, besitos, and the same at night. And it was really kind of fascinating.
So even after the separation of the family and everything.
Yes, no, she died at 103, and I would visit her a lot in Cuba in the 90s and in the the early aughts, and that she was the one who never wavered. A lot of the rest of the family all kind of dispersed around the world, actually. So, yeah.
So let's talk about the haunting of Cuban mothers as a motif.
Yeah, that's a kind of subspecialty of mine.
I have a mother who thankfully is still, fully alive, and she still haunts the hell out of me.
Your mother does sound kind of scary, actually.
Little do you know. But in this novel, sort of, there's a literal haunting. Felicia is a ghost, or is an aspect of Vivanito's character that he's still sort of trying to work out. Talk a little bit where that comes from, because I also felt that I was with the mother too. Now I'm a Cuban parent also, and I'm sort of with the mother. Yeah, haunt him because he's your child, and he belongs to you. So talk about how you worked out both sides, because there's a balance that you create that you don't know. Like, you feel sorry for Ivanito, and there's this wonderful. For those of you who haven't read that, there's this wonderful image in this novel that as soon after he sees after the scene I read, and he experiences his mother the first time, he goes to the mirror, and all of a sudden there's this like projection. There's like a kind of halo like thing, sort of, and he's not sure whether it's real or not. But then he starts to feel it. And it becomes kind of, this is one of the things that you do so wonderfully with imagery throughout your work. The idea you take an image that's been out there and you twist it and you resculpt it. That it's something completely different and completely fresh. And so this young man who, is gay and is acting, is acting on stage, whose mother tried to poison him when he was young, and is haunted by his mother now has this thing in his head that is supposed to make him feel saintly, but also is a torture instrument, which is exactly the way Cuban mothers make you feel all the time. So I've never seen a metaphor. Like now I call my mother, I go, I cannot think about the halo and the torture chamber. But talk a little about how you came up with that image, which is fascinating.
Oh my God. Well, what happens after that opening scene where he gets a glimpse of the mom who just sort of rasping at her, the next time he sees her a few weeks later, she pops up when he's in the bathhouse. And she seems oblivious to the surroundings, you know, and then they kind of go home together, and she belts back some rum, and so they sit there, and he's trying to find out why she's back. She died 20 years ago, and he was just a little boy. And she's not that forthcoming, but she envelops him in her warmth and with that maternal voice, with that, you know, that old familiar safety, which was in a way an illusion too. And then he falls asleep, and when he wakes up, he literally looks in the mirror, and he has a halo that is embedded in his scalp, but only he can see it, and then this little cousin of his who comes to Berlin with Pilar can see it. But it's there, and it's torturing him. And you know, I'm seeing a little halo kind of poking up from the back of your skull there.
I will never get that image out of my head now. But I also said that you're with Felicia too, in the way
the mom is named Felicia, right?
You're with her in the way that she that affection is a kind of possession too. You know, I do that sometimes to my kid who's 15 years old, and I hug him and he goes, "Let go of me." and I feel what Felicia is feeling, like you don't want to let go of him. Come with me now.
I'm suspecting, Ernesto, that you identify more with the mother than the son. Okay, so
I think I do.
We don't have to get all like psychodynamics up here, but I'm a little worried about you. No, I mean, look, Cuban Mothers, and my daughter is in the audience. I won't point her out, but I mean, I'm sure she could speak to the overbearingness of Cuban Mothers. But hopefully also...
And Cuban parents in general, yeah. There's a love, there's an affection there, and there's also, I mean, I think it's a kind of equivalent to Jewish mothers. There's a kind of like, you are the hero of, you know, any life that is related to me, but I'm also going to harass you till the day you die.
That's right. You have to serve as scaffolding for my life, too. So, no. I mean, I think it's very complicated. And I think for those of us who came when we were young, but with, you know, I felt like growing up in New York in the 60s and 70s that my mother, even though she was only 22 years older than me, I felt like I had a great-grandmother in terms of what was expected of me. I remember... I was a freshman in high school, and a boy asked me to go to the movies, and I told her, and she was all stressed out because, like, who's going to chaperone? I'm like, chaperone? I said no to the date, you know. I mean, so it was like being going through the front door of our house in Brooklyn was for me like going back in time 30 years or longer, maybe 19th century even.
You said in a recent interview that our notions of identity now are more supple, that they don't just have to do with our geographic location where we live, but also our geographic history where we come from. Explain that to a group of New Yorkers who are so superior about their geographic location.
Is that it? Where's the exit?
We have a serious superiority complex.
A hasty retreat here. Yeah. No, I think actually New York, in a way, is one of the big hubs of fluid identity, multiple hyphenations, various allegiances. There's so much that goes into identity that I think a lot of the language for it, you know, like when I was growing up, people would ask, and this is a taboo to say today, like, where are you from? And what they meant was where was your family from, essentially. But now I think it's just kind of more wonderfully diverse, and I think that you might have started out. I might have started out, or the Cubans in Miami, or on the island, or whatever. But what's happened is this just dispersal, this huge and interesting diaspora that I was alluding to earlier, and that you get to kind of choose what makes sense for you. Are you more of a clarinetist, or are you more Japanese, or are you? We get to pick and choose, and New York and the places we have lived are pretty much meccas for that. So I don't have to convince you New Yorkers of anything, okay?
Okay, but answer this. So when I was a freshman in college, there was this great professor called Barry Ahern. He was a Whitman scholar. He still is. And one of the first lectures, I'm still amazed he said this. He said, in 50, he walks in and he would just lecture the whole time, no questions. He says, in 50 years, American literature will be, the writers at the forefront of American literature will be named García and Hernandez and Diaz.
Mestre read, too.
No, but I was shocked. No, he literally said this. Like, he was just saying Hispanic names. And here's one proof, already. but the idea, but you consider yourself a Latino writer. And what is the responsibility of that? If there is any responsibility, and how does that play into this notion that our identity is supple and that we don't have to identify?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't mean negating anything. For me, it's just and rather than or choosing this or that. It's this and that, and the tent keeps getting bigger, I hope, But I remember when Dreaming came out in the early 1992, there was a lot of talk about literature on the margins. That was actually the phrase then. And I remember writing or talking in an interview saying something like, no, the margins are going to change mainstream, redefine mainstream literature. And it's not going to be margins anymore. And what's happened in the last 30 years is kind of extraordinary.
I think that's what the professor was talking about, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we have, and not just literary fiction, but in all genres, which is a healthy sign of everybody participating. You could get zombie Latinx novels. You could get everything. Everything under the sun. Huge influx of YA novels in the last few years. And also just from lots of different corners of the many different diasporas.
So you don't feel that, I guess, burden or halo of being a Latino writer and having to sort of represent something about that, or being a Cuban American writer?
Can you give me your mother's phone number? Because I need to have a little chat with her, because
you think
you're
she's
traumatized.
Right.
I'm teasing you. Yeah. No, I don't feel burdened. I just feel like it's part of me. I don't feel. I can't control what other people do. If they're going to pigeonhole you or put you here or put you there, I don't really concern myself with that. I don't think it's my problem. But I'm sure there are people in the audience who disagree. Anyone want to chime in on that? Angie, do you want to chime in? No, you don't? Dalma, do you want to chime in? My people. What? Okay, well, feel free later. I don't want to put you on the spot.
One last thing. Let's talk about Azul here, who is a child character, probably the most difficult kind of character to write, not because we have forgotten what it's like to be, but because so much of what we've gone through sort of coats how we interpret what children are like.
There's a 6-year-old in the novel, and he's the daughter of the Pilar Puente character who appeared in Dreaming in Cuban and is now pushing, she's close to in her 40s, has a 6-year-old, she's a single mother. And so that's what you're talking about, Azul. Mm-hmm.
To talk a little bit about writing that, but also the idea, this is where I lost kind of sympathy for the haunting mother because she starts messing with the little kid.
You're secretly still rooting for her. I know you.
I mean, I love that character. That character is fascinating. But talk about sort of creating this child character becomes very important at the end, and who I think does that thing that, you know, critics sometimes talk about novels. It leads you out of the novel in a certain way, where there's a possibility of a future outside of that novel.
Yeah, you know, we exchanged some notes today about things we might talk about, and you mentioned that, and I was haunted myself from that, because in fact a novel that I'm considering, although I'm also considering kind of not writing for a while, was about Azul 20 years into the future, and Azul in Japan, interviewing, making a documentary about the father he'd never met, who's 60 years older than him. Long story. But yes, I was charmed by him, just like I'm charmed by most 6-year-olds, and I also got to, you know, Pilar is a little bit of an alter ego character for me, and so it took me back to my own mothering, the mistakes I made, the overprotectiveness, but also the well-intentioned gestures toward opening up my child's world bit by bit, you know? So I don't know if I'm answering your question.
But the possibility that he too is affected by this history. He too is affected by what happened.
I think everything that happens in past lives, even we live inside us. You know, it's like that.
And there's a wonderful moment too where Pilar who is, you know, a sculptor. She's very liberal and very open-minded, and Ivanito's wearing, you know, his outfits, and she says, "Can we tone it down?" And
and he's furious with her.
He will not have it. But even her, like, that's how protective you can be. And in some ways, we turn into those people who are trying to ban books. You know, when we sometimes.
No, never. No, leave me out of that.
No, but I'm saying that it's that instinct of, like, don't show him too much gayness because, you know, he's only 6. And Ivanito kind of loses it, saying, "What are you saying? You want me not to be myself?"
Right. Rightly so.
Yeah.
She overstepped for sure. Yeah.
But it is coming from that instinct that I think Felicia has throughout the novel of wanting to possess, wanting to protect.
One thing is like wanting to protect. Boy, of course, even with our mothers not here, we're talking about them. This is the epitome. This is
the halo, man.
This is the essence of it. But you know, one thing is to protect and nurture. Another thing is to possess. And I think whether it's your mother or grandmother or you know, significant other, I think possession is no. I mean, I don't think that's healthy. I think possession is, you know, your favorite pen, not your child. You know, not another human being.
One last thing before we turn to questions. Azul's father says something great. You know, he's not in the novel, but he says...
He was a Japanese installation artist and the professor of Pilar. Are you following any of this? I think you just have to read. It's so complicated.
He says great art is part revulsion and part reverence.
Wait, what is part what?
Part revulsion and part reverence.
Art is part revulsion.
Great art.
Oh, great art. Oh, I thought you said radar. And I'm like, I don't remember writing that. Okay, great art is part reverence and part revulsion. I agree with that.
So talk about that a little bit, and how it has sort of manifested in your own work.
I think, well, maybe this goes to the secrets in the earlier parts of the conversation, where I think I am interested in reading and writing just the full panoply of possibilities for my characters, you know, and it's not always pretty. And they go down a lot of blind alleys, or they get in tons of trouble. In fact, I sometimes, you know, sitting in my chair doing this, I get a little envious. Their lives are so much more interesting than mine, you know, as I kind of facilitate and make myself available in a way for all of this. But yes, I don't think we should turn away from revulsion. I think part of our work as writers, all of us as writers and artists and observers and members of society, is to hold the gaze where we need to hold the gaze.
That's a great phrase.
And keep holding the gaze, yeah. And then, see where that leads.
And I also think it makes the characters more human. That's why I think Felicia is so fascinating, because it makes them, in all their ugliness, it makes them recognizably human.
Yeah. I'm going to consult your mother for the next book,
Let's turn to questions. Let's turn to questions. I think someone will bring on the microphone. Oops. Thank you all for coming, by the way.
Thank you so much. And I haven't seen you in forever, so we're like getting reacquainted on stage.
And laughing a lot.
Yeah.
Hi, I loved the book. I was sick this last week, so I read almost the whole thing.
Oh my God.
But I loved how you used photos and descriptions of photos within the novel to kind of connect, like fill in the dots sort of certain characters' narratives and certain histories. And I noticed that I think the photo that you used for Pilar was you when you were younger, potentially?
Yes. I don't know if you can see it. Hang on a second. Yeah. There is, Pilar has a series of interludes that describe photographs. And for me, it was a way to do something analogous to Dreaming in Cuban of Celia's letters, except she's a visual artist. So she has these snapshots that serve as kind of backstory a bit. And then I think part 2, if I remember correctly, ends with a photograph of...
Well, that's not in the ARC.
You can't really see it. Yeah, it's not in the...
Is that you?
That's me, yeah. You could... can you see this? Oh.
Page 127.
Yeah, and that's...
Wow.
It's like a real intense stare. I'm like 13 or 14.
But this is not in the advanced reader's copy. That's awesome.
So there is that one photograph in the whole book, and Pilar is just staring out into the Pilar / you know who, staring out into the world, going, "Yeah, try me." And I hadn't intended. In fact, the reason this happened was because my parents were cleaning out their storage and whatever, and then they basically sent me everything that they didn't throw out and they thought I'd want, they sent it my way. Most of it I didn't want, but I found this old, what is it? It's like an old...
immigration naturalization.
It's like an immigration naturalization thing. And I thought, wow, this is insane. And so that actually, their cleaning out their storage gave me the idea for the series of photographs. And then I ended up using just this one. So... Thanks for the question. Did I even let you finish your question?
No, I mean, I wanted to hear that too. But I guess my question...
I'm sorry.
Was that most of the narrators are men. Most of the narrators are women in the book. And men kind of have a side character. Like, they're not the main focus. But
you can say marginalized. It's okay.
They influence a lot of the female characters and play a big role in their lives. And especially there's a description of a photograph from when Pilar was a child, I think. And it kind of describes this situation with her mom and this other man, or maybe her father. And I think my question is just how you decided to use the photographs, which you already sort of answered, but also how you decided to portray the men in these kind of looking back moments, and the photographs being an example of that, to illustrate what you were trying to say about men and women and the role of fathers in the characters' lives.
Yeah. I'm trying to think which letter you're referring to, but yeah, I would say a lot of those images, I'm mostly just making shit up as I go along, But, there are times, and these letters, these photographs or descriptions of photographs, in fact, capture some of my own life. So they are quite autobiographical. So there's one in which little Pilar runs away with a big basket of clothes her mother, took out of the dirty hamper and said, okay, you want to go? Go. And I did, and I went, and I didn't come back, and my mother had to chase me all around to find me. Things like that, which just stick with you, because I remember thinking, God, I'm on my own. I'm like 6 years old. I'm on my own now, and nothing has changed. The ice cream man's still coming by, and birds are still tweeting, and here I am, like here to my destiny. And I remember that so well. It wasn't the first time I ran away. Anyway, so actually you've just hit on the most autobiographical of all, and they're just little interludes, but yeah, it's me there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, I thought you were going to give the microphone to my daughter, and you went right by her.
I want to say a question.
No, I'm not going to say.
So I'm curious about the connection, and because it seems like a lot of the story is in reflection. So if you could choose one character in Vanishing Maps to give advice to their younger self, what would that be?
That's a good question, right? Do you want to answer that one?
I mean, it would have to be Felicia, obviously.
Of course, Felicia. He's obsessed with Felicia. Oh my God, she's like some version of your own mother.
Los locos juntos.
Con su tema, right? Advice.
Lourdes is interesting because she has changed in some ways, not the most, but she has become harder.
This is Pilar's mom.
Pilar's mom, who ran a bakery here in Brooklyn in Dreaming
From
in
which
Cuban.
she vowed to fight communism with her donuts. Right?
But still was loving in a way that she's kind of lost.
No, I don't think so. Not so loving. But anyway, go ahead. He's like, who put him up to this? This is like one grand apologia for Cuban Mothers. Excuse me. And I am one, but
in this novel, she has become sort of a hardened Miami Cuban.
I'm not talking to you anymore. No, I'm teasing. No, I mean, go ahead and answer it, because we can disagree.
I think it would be the other way around with her. Like the character in Dreaming in Cuban would somehow I do think she's much more sympathetic in Dreaming in Cuban.
Sympathetic? Oh, okay. Well, all I can tell you,
you have a talent of showing characters who are doing sort of things,
awful things.
Yes, but also that we can see that we can see how that could be part of us too, and I think we can identify with them. Like she.
Well, can I just tell you one story? Okay, so this Lourdes, who's Pilar's mother, very domineering, the classic Cuban mother that Ernesto loves. We've established that tonight.
Came to Brooklyn and established herself and was.
Okay. Anyway, surprise, surprise, she's based on my mother. And I was very anxious when the book came out. We're talking 31 years ago. I'm in my 30s myself and terrified that she's going to read it and what she's going to say. So a couple of months go by, and I get the dreaded call, and I thought, okay, I'm moving to Indonesia. And she says, I read your book. And I'm like, yeah. And, it's Lourdes' character. She goes, I thought she was the heroine of the novel. And that kind of sums up Cuban Mothers, no matter what.
I'm moving to Miami.
All right, more questions? Stop. No more with the Cuban Mothers.
And we have time for one more question.
Okay. You've been so indulgent. Wonderful audience. Thank you.
Hi. I read Dreaming in Cuban, but I haven't.
Where are you? Oh, hi. Okay.
I haven't read Vanishing
Oh,
Maps
Erica.
yet.
Is
Yeah.
that Erica? Hi.
Hi. But I'm curious what it's like to intersperse a different language throughout your writing and what that feels like, just because I don't know if I can really say that I've ever done that. And it's so beautiful the way that you do that. And I'd just love to hear more about your process for that.
Oh, thank you. Well, Vanishing Maps, because of the big diaspora, it has Russian in it, it has German, it has French, and it has Spanish in it. Most of which I just had to look up on Google Translate, frankly. You know, I can get by in German a little bit. You know, I took German in college, but I can't get into anything non-functional, let's put it that way. But no, I think to me it's very integral. You know, in 30 years ago when I first started publishing, everyone expected you to italicize the Spanish, make sure there was plenty of context for it, and pretty much hold the hand of the presumed reader, right? And so now it's not like that at all. And I think it's as it should be. A lot of us are code switching, not just languages, but different kinds of slang and in lots of subcultures and whatever. And I think that's what we live in these combined, interesting linguistic experiments that are ever evolving, because language is ever evolving. And so, yeah, I don't apologize that for anymore. Look, I read Anna Karenina and all those patronymics, and I had to look it up and figure it out, you know, and if you're interested, you will. And if you're not, you can still cruise on and just concentrate on Felicia.
It's also, I mean, especially like the German here, it's also very well folded in.
Yeah, I want it to feel that, and for me, a novel is in a way a musical enterprise. And so for me, the ebb and flow of what happens and how the language contributes to that ebb and flow is absolutely crucial to me. At several points in the course of writing a novel, I will read it aloud, and sometimes also pretty much always read it aloud backwards even once, you know, last chapter, penultimate chapter, whatever, just because I want it all to almost flow every which way.
Well, that's great. The backwards.
Yeah, you're gonna do that on your next one?
Absolutely.
Okay, all right. Okay, well, I think we're done, right?
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for agreeing to do this. Thank you all for coming. It's just very fun.
So fun. Thank you both. And I know a bunch of you already have your books. So if you already have your book, you can come up here and just line up right here, and you can get it personalized. And if you don't have your book yet, just go to the bookstore. And thank you all for coming.